Welcome everybody to Posse Presents Bikepacking, which is going to be presented by me. I'm Danielle. And then we've also got Shea and Hailey. And for those who don't know, Rodeo Adventure Posse is a group that sprung out from Rodeo Adventure Labs, which is a bike company in Denver. And we are the women's adventure cycling community wing of that organization. Our motto is ride your bike, explore your potential, create community. And it certainly has a wing of empowering other women to also do the same. But we also are inclusive of non-binary, transgender, anybody who really feels underrepresented in the cycling community. We're here for you. You can ride with us. And we're happy to have everybody, including cis hetero white men, in the gang today. So that's a little bit about the posse. We will have a question and answer period towards the end. So either type your question in the chat, or if you want to have it more of a face-to-face, just hold it until the end. In that regard, please stay muted until the end. And we'll keep an eye on the chat if something is specific to what we're talking about during that particular slide. Shay, we're ready for the next one. So again, I'm Danielle. I have done a variety of different types of bike packing over the years. Some of the initial adventures might even be called touring. Some was fully supported, some was self-supported, some has been camping, some has been sleeping in hotels, some has been a mix of all three. Most of which has been road or gravel. Haven't gotten into the mountain bike side quite as much yet, but I'm looking forward to maybe doing a little bit of that this summer. So that's some of my bike packing experience. Shay?
So I'm Shea Rossetti. I am actually based in Iowa, and I've gone bike packing like I think just like a handful of times, and I'm more of a backpacker. That's like my background. So the majority of that experience has kind of gone over to the bike, and it's been an awesome experience, and now I love it more, but with the complications of two wheels under me and potential mechanicals instead of just my feet. So I've really enjoyed it, and it's definitely more my jam. And so I've done more of no solo bike packing because of a spinal injury. I tend to go more with like a friend or a group now. But yeah, that's kind of just a tidge of the iceberg of me.
Hi everybody, I'm Hailey Moore, and I guess, well, I'm based in Boulder, Colorado. I've been here about 4.5 years. I'm from the East Coast originally. I came to riding bikes through commuting, and then after moving to Boulder and just kind of getting a sense of the different types of terrain that are around here, I was really attracted to sort of the all-terrain gravel riding scene that's really been emerging in the last 10 years. For me, the idea of going farther and longer has always been the appeal of bike packing, and just really becoming familiar with where I'm living at a very like on the ground level. And I think that's like the most beautiful thing about bike packing. I took my first trip about 3 years ago, and since then I've probably done over a dozen trips, anywhere from overnighters to long weekend trips to a week-long trip is the longest trip I've done so far. So yeah, looking forward to longer trips, but also just seeing new places. Okay, next slide. So you want to go bike packing? We're here for you. I think Danielle's kicking us off for the next slide. Oh, no, it's me. Good thing I'm already here. Okay, so when you want to talk about planning your route, I know a lot of the folks here have either never been bike packing or have just been once before. For those of you who haven't been bike packing, I would recommend for your first trip, staying close to home if you appreciate the terrain that is in close proximity to you, and maybe just linking together some of your favorite riding or doing one of your long rides as like an overnighter, just to kind of like check your systems. If something goes disastrously wrong, at least you're already familiar with the route. It'd be easy to wrangle some friends if you guys don't have to drive anywhere to start your trip. Otherwise though, some other options are packing your bike up in the car, and driving further afield, to start your route. I think in terms of getting route ideas, there's a lot of great resources out there like bikepacking.com, Ride with GPS to look for established routes. I can't express enough like how thorough bikepacking.com is. They basically just have a global map, and you can just kind of zoom in on the region that you're interested in visiting. And I think that the routes they post are pretty well vetted, often giving gear suggestions and whatnot. So that's a pretty easy way to just like cherry pick a route that looks appealing. Otherwise, if you want to do none of the above and create your own new route, I would suggest really taking some time to research the roads and the terrain that you're going to be traveling. So for instance, I just did a ride up in the Pacific Northwest. I traveled up there to go see my dad who lives in Seaside, Oregon. And then I decided to go visit a friend who lives outside of Seattle. And I thought like, oh, wow, it's about a little over 200 miles between the two. How fun would it be just to like ride my bike, between them? And I had never been on any of these roads before. And so my process for developing that route was a lot of time looking at Google Earth with satellite on, so you can kind of get an idea of the terrain that you're going to be in. I think for gravel roads, it can be really helpful to sometimes just Google the name of the road. And if it's like a really gnarly, like 4x4 road, people will often have like YouTube GoPro videos of that terrain. So you can kind of say like, oh, is this going to be, doable this time of year? Similarly, the 4x4s offer a lot of resources, and they'll often have blogs or forums about when non-paved roads are plowed or not plowed, depending on what kind of elevation you're getting up to. Similarly, there is another issue to consider, which is private property. Sometimes mapping apps will not indicate if a road is private property, but I recently discovered the Onyx app, which should have up-to-date property line information. So I think that's a really good resource to have downloaded on your phone. Finally, I would say once your route is finalized, I prefer to navigate with Ride with GPS if I'm using my phone, because you can download your route and have it available to you offline, fully zoom in, and it's not super pixelated. So I think that's a pretty invaluable resource for having if you, like I did, found myself without cell phone service and my road was not what I thought it was going to be. So I kind of had to reroute, mid-trip. But I also just think that it's really important if you're going out on a route that is either not established, or that you're just personally unfamiliar with, looking for specific bail options at certain points that you think might be challenging is a good just plan B. But if there are no bail options and you just decide to go for it and conditions aren't favorable, I think you kind of always have to be mentally prepared to turn back around and reroute, like just in case. That's only happened to me once, where it just wasn't a smart decision to continue in the direction that I had planned. And at the end of the day, I still finished my ride that same night, albeit a couple hours later than I had planned. But sometimes I think, you can get easily sucked into like, no, I have to keep going because I've already gone this far. And sometimes turning around is like the safest option. Okay, next.
So the type of touring that you're likely to do is most likely going to be completely influenced by how you choose your route. Did you sign up to do something like the Colorado Trail? Well, then you're going to be mountain biking. Did you sign up to do a monster road loop? Well, you're probably going to be on your road bike. So your route choices definitely are going to impact what type of touring we'd say that you're doing. And then the gear choices that you'd see from that. Um, there's a variety of different ways to pack your bike, which then get turned into different names of touring. But I think the most important thing to remember here is that those things are all arbitrary stipulations and there are no rules. If you set out to camp and things get weird and you need a night in a hotel, there's no rules. If your route seems like it's going square shaped and there's a town that wasn't in the plan and it's right there, go for it. So types of touring, there's a million and different ways to skin this cat, and you can sort of utilize whatever is most accessible to you. If you want to go ride your townie bike to the local state park with established campsites with all of your stuff in your backpack because that's what you've got right now, go for it. You're still going to have a freaking great time. And the idea really is to just go explore somewhere new that your bike will take you. It can be a simple overnighter, it can be a multi-day adventure. And obviously starting with one and working your way up to the other is going to be the way to go. Other things to consider is that the type of touring is going to impact what's reasonable for you, and also probably will again be based on how you plan your route. If you're doing a major mountain bike adventure, your mileage and your elevation is going to be different, as well as what you're able to pack on your bike. So knowing those sort of limitations of what your bike can carry, where you're going to be headed, what your frequency of hitting towns are, is all going to impact the type of touring that you're doing, but also how you then make your gear choices, which are your next slide. So from the prior slide, we had a setup with a tent, and then the picture below is a setup with a bivvy. The biggest thing that's going to impact how you pack and what you need to pack is how you plan to sleep. So if you're doing touring, that's what we might call credit card touring, where you've got Airbnb or hotel reservations, then you probably don't plan or need to bring camping gear at all. Even so, there's a rabbit hole of different types of camping gear that you can go into, which is tarps, bivvies, cowboy camping, which is just sleeping out under the stars, and then a million different kinds of tents. You're going to have limitations based on how much stuff you can fit on your bike, or if you want to have backpacks or not. But what your sleep setup is probably going to be the biggest influence for how much room you need and how you pack things. We've got a photo here with some stuff literally strapped to a saddle, as well as an array of bike packing bags. I would say these modern bike packing bags are sort of what's kind of highlighted backpacking in its evolution for what we see now. But panniers are totally still a thing. Oh yeah, hammocks for sure. If there's trees, doesn't work so great in the desert. But panniers are totally still a thing. Basket packing is a thing. I've seen people tow things in burleys, be it their dog as a camping buddy or a pile of gear. There's also bob trailers and other ways to carry additional equipment. So you can bring the kitchen sink if you want. It's going to impact how far you get that day, because the heavier stuff gets, the harder it is to cover mile in elevation, which is where we get our cliche of less is more. So if you're able to go lighter weight and more minimalist, which granted is easier to do after you've been out a few times and realize what you do or don't need, it's going to impact your ability to cover more miles. But the basics of stuff that you're definitely going to want to have is whatever your sleep setup is, clothes for unexpected weather as well as expected weather, because sometimes it turns out to be freezing. Nutrition, which varies from person to person. You might want to get super sporty with it if you're trying to be fast. You might want to stop at that burger joint on the side of the road and get a milkshake. That's some of the joys from my perspective of bike packing or touring, is exploring all those little places off the beaten path. Water and managing how you will get additional water is huge. There's a variety of filtration services and systems that you can use. I have friends who, when they go out and do some bike packing in Moab, someone will go out a couple days in advance and stash water because they know they're not going to come across anything out there. Lighting is a huge one. If things get weird and you're caught in the dark, that's one of the things that can be forgotten if you plan for the best and then find yourself in another situation. Repair kit, we cover that kind of stuff pretty heavily in our Bike 101, as well as our endurance Posse presents that we've already had. So I do encourage you guys, if you've got kind of less bike packing specific questions, to go refer to those prior videos that we've got, as well as the slides out there. But your repair kit for bike packing might be a hair more involved than just a regular ride, or even potentially an endurance race, depending on how remote you're going to be. And then treats. If you're out there and it sucks, having that cookie that you love or your book at night at camp is a huge motivator. We talk about this a little bit in the endurance one. But especially if you're out there potentially by yourself for multiple days, or even with a partner who maybe starts to grate on you at some point, having reward system for yourself is huge. Yes, luxury item. Totally, Kimberly. So Amanda, the long days and fatigue, I think we touch on that best in the endurance events one in particular. But depending on what you've bitten off for your route, working up and training towards these sort of things is a reasonable approach if you're going to schedule yourself for a long, ambitious day of bike packing. Next slide.
Okay, back to me. So how to pack your bike. So I'll go ahead and put out the caveat that I'll be going over how to pack your bike, assuming that you're running everything on your bike. I know that Danielle mentioned that a trailer is like a totally fun and like fine way to carry extra things, but I think for the sake of this presentation, we'll just stick to having bags on your bike. So first of all, I would recommend starting off by compiling everything you're going to be needing for your trip. Clothes, sleep kit, tent if you're bringing that, repair, electronics, lights, basically everything Danielle just mentioned. Then assess your bike's geometry, specific features of your bike, such as bottle cage mount options, as well as frame size, so the size of your interior triangle, and then also your handlebar width. And then also, while you're kind of assessing these things, I think deciding how much water carrying capacity you want to have. That doesn't mean that you need to start your trip with all of your bottles full, but you want to at least be able to have like that capacity. So in terms of your bike's geometry and your specific features, the frame, the interior triangle of your frame is kind of your most valuable real estate in terms of carrying things. I really prefer to carry all of my heaviest items inside the frame so that that weight is like low down, it's right underneath me. It's going to roll the easiest there and you're not going to notice it as much. Say if it's like really up high and behind you, like in a seat bag. So I would suggest, if you can, try to maximize that space. However, if you have a smaller frame, or if you're touring on a mountain bike, or if the interior of your triangle is the only place that you have bottle cage mounts, that might be a little bit trickier. Handlebar width is important because it'll dictate the size of a front bag that you could run, or how wide of a bag you could run. I've definitely been in this situation before where I have this awesome stuff sack situation where I'm going to run on my front bars, and then it's kind of like a pain to shift all day. So make sure that you've kind of run that before leaving the house, and shifting and braking feels comfortable depending on what you're running up front. There are some hacks for bottle cage mounts. Specifically, there's some clamps that you could run on your fork legs if you don't have bottle cage mounts on your fork legs. I think there's probably some information about that on the Rodeo Adventure Labs blog. They have a lot of really awesome hacks for how to carry more things. But back to kind of like the bag setup, you've got your heavy stuff inside the frame. So maybe that's your repair kit and your electronics, tent poles if you're planning on bringing a tent. And then, like I said before, I prefer to ride with my lighter items, either in a seat bag or a handlebar bag. So I'll often run my entire sleep setup in my bar bag. And for me, that's a sleeping bag, a bivy, and then either an inflatable sleeping pad or a foam pad. On the previous slide, you could see that I run that foam pad on the back of the bike. So then I've got the rest of my sleep system up in the bars there. And then wherever I don't have my sleep kit, I have my additional clothes. Of course, you can get away with carrying less in the summertime, which is super nice. But I'll put my clothes that I don't want until the evening. Like I said, either in that seat bag or in the handlebar bag if there's still space. I do think it's important to keep the things that you want during the day super accessible. So keep your light layers and gloves and rain gear, maybe also in your frame bag. You want to keep your snacks there, as well as wall charger. So in addition to like a battery bank, I'll bring a standalone phone wall charger so that if I'm at like a gas station getting snacks or something, I'll be that sort of vagrant looking person jacking the electricity on the outside, like that's by like the ice cooler. But you gotta do what you gotta do. And then you also want to keep things like your chapstick handy and sunscreen if you're bringing stuff like that. Some people really like those top tube little caddies, or kind of like those little feed bags that look, almost like a koozie, that go right between, right in the corner, the 90-degree corner of your handlebars and your stem. There are some of the top tube caddies that I like, but some of them rub my knees. Same with the feed bag. I'm personally not into them because, again, they rub my knees. And I think that affects my pedal stroke, but there are plenty of people who like those, and they are super handy little like chuck buckets. So if you find that you don't have enough room with this type of setup, full frame bag, bar bag, seat bag, then like Shea was saying, panniers are a super classy way to tour, and they have an insane amount of carrying capacity. This trip that I just did up from Oregon to Seattle, I ran panniers because I needed to bring my laptop with me and my laptop charger, in addition to 3 extra outfits and some running shoes. So I had a lot of space and it was awesome. But just, another consideration with those, I wouldn't take panniers on maybe super rowdy terrain, as the racks that they're mounted to could fail, and that would be a pretty huge pain. And also, of course, they increase the profile of your bike, so not ideal for say single track. Additionally, if you don't want to run panniers, they make rear racks. They have some really lightweight carbon ones these days, but they also have the really tried and true aluminum ones that you can run over your back wheel, and then you can run a larger rear bag there. So that could provide a little bit of extra capacity too. The trade-off, of course, with panniers or running a rear bag setup like that is just a little bit of extra weight. And then I saw here somebody in the comments is doing a race. Amanda is doing the Gravel Royale, a 4-day stage race. Any tips on packing properly for that? I would just say try to get away with less if you're trying to do some big long days. I typically think that for me, an overnight bike packing trip looks almost the exact same in terms of what I'm packing for a week-long trip. I typically kind of err on the lighter side of things. But yeah, so I think it would just, behoove you to kind of trim down your packing list just to the essentials. Make sure you're really familiar with the course and water refills so that maybe you could get away with carrying a little bit less water. And then also, I don't know what your sleeping or camping arrangement is there, but if you are sleeping out, then I think the accordion style foam pad is the best option for that, just because it's really quick to lay out and then fold back up. And also, to save a little bit of extra weight, if you're really gram counting, you can cut off, you can trim the foam pad just to be as long as you want it to be, both in length and in width. So that's all I have for you guys on packing your bike.
Okay, so it's my turn. So bike packing or touring with friends, there's been a lot of talk of like solo, bike packing and whatnot, but like my strengths kind of bike packing with friends. So what it comes down to is we kind of having that like responsibility list is huge. So my friend who I've gone bike packing with is super detailed on the route and planning, which is, Hailey discussed that earlier with like, ride with GPS and then using Google and stuff like that. And then I came in, on the gear side, like because of the backpacking background that I have. So sharing the load just physically is huge. So like we decided we were going to share a tent. And she took the rain fly and the poles, and I took the main body of the tent. And that really helps, sharing that load. Same with tools. Like you don't both need to carry a multi-tool. You don't both need to carry, a hand pump. And, both of us were riding tubeless, and we carried, I had the stands and she had an extra tube, and I carried an extra tube too, just in case. So really sharing that load and a gear list is huge. My recommendations for that when bike packing with friends is we shared a Google spreadsheet and Excel sheet. So we had a list of all the gear that she had and all the gear that I had, and we put an X by our name. And we're like, all right, so this is what I'll have on my bike, and this is what she'll have on her bike. And then like for the tent, you take this and I'll take this kind of thing. And then when it comes to, personal, like water and stuff, really knowing how much you drink, and it depends on the person, right? So when it's harder, I tend to drink a little bit more. So we knew that we would have some running water and some rivers near us when we were in between bigger portions of town. So really planning out and plotting that water stop and who's going to bring the water filtration system, whether if it's like a mini Sawyer because it takes up less room is what we used. But luckily we had those water stops planned out, so it wasn't really necessary for us to stop and get, knee deep in a river. So, but mentally too is huge. So knowing your partner's ride style, right? Do you ride with this person on a regular basis? Are they your mountain biking friend? Are they your gravel riding friend? So how long of a distance have they been? Have they discovered that deep, dark, ugly space? I don't know if Hailey or Danielle can talk to that, but I've totally discovered it and I've gotten comfortable with it, which is weird to say. Feel free to speak in, you guys. But knowing when you need that space to yourself on your bike, and it's just like, hey, I'm probably gonna be ahead of you, probably a couple 100 feet for like a few hours. We're both going to the same spot. I just need some space because I'm digging in deep today, and I know like the elevation's pretty intense, or it's just this long, nasty, straight stretch of nothingness. So feeding on your partner's energy and knowing when to give and take is huge. So to me personally, when I'm backpacking, that's that's what's important for me. Would you guys kind of like agree, like finding that space where you kind of go off and do your own thing just for a little bit, and making sure, hey, when we get to like this passing the road, like stop, wait for me, and then we can keep going kind of day sometimes.
Totally. Go ahead, Danielle.
Establishing standards like that. Hey, if there's a split, I expect you to wait for me or not, because we're both comfortable with the route. Communication about if somebody is going to take off is good, because no one wants to be that person who's like totally left behind. But I would also say that I would not recommend going bike packing with someone that you've never ridden with before either. So shakeout ride with humans is almost maybe as important as a shakeout ride with gear.
Yeah, 100%. Like, an example for me at least is that my bike packing partner is super snacky. So I didn't realize that she didn't know how to eat while she was riding on her bike. So like, it's a skill, you guys, like picking up your water bottle while you're moving, and like opening up that, bag, or reaching into a back pocket and pulling out snacks. Like, eating on your bike is really important. But what's also super important is when you're bike packing or touring, like, it's not a race unless it is. Right. So, not rushing that person, but really knowing how they work, and if they need to slow down a little bit, and finding that happy pace with them too. So, but slow down. Like, you're not having, unless you're having to beat time or weather or something, that communication piece with your partner is super important. And always expect the unexpected. I mean, we'll talk about this later too, but for instance, my partner went through, it was a really hot day in the desert, and she went through her water faster than I did. So I ended up giving up a water bottle, but I knew that the reason I did it, I knew that there was like a water spot like 10 miles away. So I was like, it's fine. So like really kind of planning that out, and knowing how much you can carry, and talking about it, and working with each other is huge. So like, if you're hurting, you need to talk to your partner, and mentally, like, they can't do it, and being that positive that they might need to keep going, or to know when to stop, knowing when to turn around, or finding a place and just calling it quits for the day, or even if it's calling quits for and turning back around and just stopping for the entire trip. I mean, it may suck, but honestly, friendship is more important than the ride. That ride and that route will always be there. And I think that's super important to know. But enjoying the ride, that's really what it comes down to. Taking in all those views and enjoying each other's company and enjoying the quiet is really big. And learning how each other works on a bike, of course, that shakedown before the ride, whether it's with your gear or with your partner, is also really important too, like Danielle said earlier. But if you guys have any more questions, I probably didn't hit upon, because there's like so much more when it comes down to riding with people, like pop it into the chat and we'll touch on it later for sure.
Yeah, Shea, I actually was just going to add something quick about riding with other people, which is, I think that it's really important going into a trip with either one other person or a whole group of people, that everybody is going to have like their high moment and their low moment at a different time. So that can really affect, I just think that you should, mindfully factor that in to your mileage expectations, like for the day. And like Shea was saying, definitely have a good idea of how matched you and your partner are in fitness and just experience out on trips like these. For example, I went on a really fun trip with a good friend last summer who she's like a super incredible runner. So I knew that she was definitely physically prepared, but just hadn't spent very much time out on the bike. And what I didn't factor in was our mileage for her on a loaded bike. which is very different than just like a day ride.
Oh yeah, that's huge.
So, you know, just kind of all these like small things can like add up when you're riding with other people. Something that I really like to do when I'm riding with other people is split the day between riding and chatting, and then also, you know, kind of politely saying like, oh, well, I'm going to listen to this podcast like for a while, you know, because I think it can be emotionally draining for me to spend all day riding and like talking with other people, especially if the terrain is challenging. So while I think it's really nice to have the momentum of another person to ride with, I think it can also be really nice to just kind of like zone out on a podcast or some music and be sharing the experience with that other person, but just be like, hey, I need to check out for a couple hours and I'll come back and tell you about this podcast or this audiobook I just listened to. And also for me, when it comes to riding with other people, especially, or just on hard days, I find that usually if I am like getting really like emotionally low, then I probably just need to eat something.
Oh yeah, that's huge. Like, hunger is real, and like the snacking and the nutrition is big on when you're bike packing or just like gravel riding or on your bike in general. Like when I start feeling that low point and I'm like, I hate this and don't talk to me, and I'm like, oh no, I'm hungry. It's not because I hate this, I love my bike, it's because I'm hungry. So like really knowing yourself, and again how your partner works. So if your partner also gets hangry, like knowing like, hey, have you had a Snickers? Seriously.
Yeah, no, when I first started bike touring, I kind of got sandbagged because my boyfriend, he like never eats on the bike. So I just thought that was like normal, you know, and then we'd be like, you know, 5 hours in or something, and I was just like questioning like the meaning of life, and I was just like, oh no, I'm just like actually really hungry.
Yeah, I've noticed too, like when it's hotter, I tend to not be able to eat like more solid food when I'm on my bike. So knowing that too is big. But you know, like you said, what's normal for your bike partner might not be normal for you. So like taking cues from your bike partner, you know, might not necessarily be the best thing, because what works for them isn't necessarily what's going to work for your body. So, you know, knowing that about yourself. Like I said, my bike packing friend, she's super snacky. And like she knows when she needs a snack all the time. And me, I'm just like, it's hot. I need water, and I've got nutrition in my bottle, and I need like a cliff block, and I'm fine every like 45, 30 minutes, like as long as I'm like continuing that. But she's actually like full on Chex Mix and stuff. So
For sure.
That's huge.
Yeah.
All right.
Alrighty. Well, maybe we should keep moving. I definitely want to have time for folks to ask questions if they want.
Yeah. And Hailey and Danielle, like I think the what ifs are huge for all of us to talk about too. I think we were talking about this, was it yesterday? We're like, man, this hasn't happened to us. I've never tacoed a tire, thank God. Whose picture was this again? This was
oh yeah, no, I borrowed, well, so obviously the photo on the right is me after just eating it in the sand.
Oops,
yeah, the wheel taco. No, it's all good. The wheel taco and the handlebar, the broken handlebars, were both from my partner Tony.
That's who it was. Yeah. So, it's like, well, what do you do? You know, in that situation, know your route. You know, a big thing that I know is like, well, how far away from town are we, just in case there's like an emergency? So I make sure that I give my route plan to friends. I think that's huge. So your friends and family that are super close, or someone that you know who's kind of near the route, that could be that backup plan to like bail you out, right? Or knowing where your closest bike shop is, that maybe they can help with the taco tire. And you know, same with the broken handlebar and things of that sort. But there are going to be those situations where you're in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the mountains, in the middle of the desert, or somewhere that you're just not close. So I don't know, Hailey, what did your bike partner do when he tacos?
Yeah. So the taco tire, I think if you taco your wheel,
Or his
that's like a phone a friend moment. Or, if you're further afield, putting your faith in the good citizens who are in their vehicles around you and trying to get a ride somewhere. But yeah, I don't think it's yeah, you can't ride your bike, obviously. You can walk your bike as far as it takes to either get cell phone service or find another human, who maybe would give you a ride, or if you're really desperate, if there's a bike shop in a 50-mile radius of you, maybe you could call them and bribe somebody with large amounts of money to come pick you up. So I think if your wheel gets severely bent like that, that's probably kind of the worst case scenario. And that's really just sort of like, okay, well, what are my options depending on where I am. Yeah, broken handlebars, that was super unlucky because those were carbon bars, and I think they must have already had like a hairline fracture in them before starting out. And so, the bike just kind of fell over. I mean, he just had it leaned up kind of sloppily against something. A little breeze came through, fell over. Bike fell on the drop, and the bar just like broke. So maybe touring with carbon bars isn't the best option. But yeah, he was able, as you can see in the photo, just kind of splint the bar with a piece of wood. And then limp it into a bike shop. I think fortunately he was within like 50 miles of Salida, and there's a really great bike scene there. So again, pretty lucky in that regards. Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the most kind of debilitating what if has just been like constant like tire pressure issues, and that just ends up being really annoying, not like debilitating, where you can't figure out why your tire keeps going soft or something like that. And in that situation, if you're just tired of dealing with a tubeless setup, you can always just throw in a tube. For me, that's always a last case scenario, since when I'm touring, it's usually on gravel and I usually only bring one tube. So once I have the tube in, then I kind of feel like my fail safe option is already gone. But I always bring like lots of plugs with me. You can bring a patch kit for your tube. You can bring a tire boot for bacon strips, obviously. Yeah, there's tons of repair stuff that you can bring, that you could bring like a needle and thread with you if you wanted, so that like if it really got bad, you could like try to sew up your tire in that moment. But yeah, it just kind of, I think what you want to bring for those scenarios, it just really depends on how remote your route is. So the more remote your route, the more options you want to have.
Danielle, what were you
Sports nutrition wrappers are huge lifesavers.
Oh yeah, you shove them in.
But I think we've hit mechanicals pretty hard. I think one of the things that we should also touch on is, what if the route doesn't go? What if your timing and all that other stuff goes square shaped? And having those friends on the backup call, if you're close to home, is pretty good. We did a ride that was the screenshot of the ride with GPS, right? So that was a pretty ambitious loop. And we had a combination of biting off more than we could chew with fully loaded bikes on the peak to peak. And I got sick. We maybe didn't filter some water, or I splashed, I don't know, but I was no longer functioning at normal capacity. And we were meant to get to Idaho Springs that night. It wasn't happening. So because we were bike camping and we're fully self-supported in terms of what we needed, we just found a spot in the woods. We set up camp on hopefully public land, and continued on the next day. Still we're moving slower than really was good and functional, and made it to Idaho Springs, and no joke, had a friend come pick us up in his pickup truck. So stuff can get weird, and having a plan B or a plan C, particularly if it's a route that you haven't been on before, is huge. And I know we kind of touched on that earlier, but those are some of the what ifs that you should try to plan for as best you can, at least in terms of that backup friend who knows where you are, who knows where you're going, especially if you're out by yourself. Hey,
It's
if
that
you don't
expect the
check with me-
unexpected, right?
Go ahead, Shea.
That expect the unexpected. I mean, I know that sounds really broad, but you really should.
And some of that's like standard, not necessarily like 10 essentials sort of stuff, but planning for remote backcountry, protocol. Hey, if you don't hear from me by X time, call search and rescue.
Yeah. So when I went out with a friend, we had a spot. So it's like a tracker, and whenever we were halfway to we sent our route and our plan, like, hey, like we should be here at halfway point, and this is where we're planning on camping. And we were along the divide, on a portion of the divide. So we were like between Kremling and Steamboat, so not too far away. As far as like mileage goes, and not too far away from towns and things of that sort. But there was this one instance where we were, I want to say 5 miles to where we were gonna camp for the night, and my bike partner hit that mental wall. And she dug deep, and she found that really ugly, deep, dark hole that I had discovered multiple times before, but I didn't realize she hadn't. And, that was when, as riding together, you step in, you're like, you know what, 5 miles, if you really don't think you can do it, it's not important, because we can go back down a little bit down the mountain. There's a camping spot right there. And if that makes you feel better, then we can, we'll camp for the night and we'll figure it out in the morning. And if we need to turn back around and go back to the car, we can do it. And it's not that big of a deal, because it's all about having fun and enjoying being out there. So that's another what if. Like, what if your partner just like can't do it? Well, what's crazy is that one of our really good friends that we had given our route to, and who was also receiving our spot location, was 5 miles at that campsite waiting with some trail magic for us, and we didn't make it, and our spot wasn't sending and like wasn't getting out to him. But we turned around that next morning and went back to the car, and we sent out another spot like text, because we're out in the middle of the mountains, and ended up meeting him in the middle of nowhere along the gravel road along the divide. And it was exactly what she needed mentally, just to keep going. And that trail magic, whether it's your friend who just like is like, well, I just feel like meeting you guys out here for the evening because I know this is where you're supposed to be camping, right? Or if it's actual trail magic somewhere, it really does a lot for that mental state. So again, with that, like, what if, like, a little goes a long way for positivity, for sure. Anything else that I haven't touched on, you guys? Next slide, maybe. Start answering questions.
Sure, yeah.
That way.
Let's get some questions.
All right, let's see what we've got going on in this chat action. I saw a question asking like if we're pro helmet or not, and I'm 100% helmet all the time. A friend of mine just got a gnarly concussion and lost like 5 minutes of time, and that was with his helmet. So personally, I'm super pro helmet. I'm more of a mountain biker. Yeah, it really is. It's depending like your life, and then not, right? What do you guys in that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the person who asked said, what is your personal philosophy on helmets? My personal philosophy is that everybody accepts their own risks. So, I have definitely taken my helmet off while touring and strapped it to my handlebars while I'm on a long climb and there's no cars around me because I'm going 6 miles an hour up a hill. But that's my choice. I think that you can say, objectively speaking, that to be your absolute safest, you have a helmet on your head all the time. But at the same time, my personal philosophy is to let everybody make their own decisions and then also be responsible for those consequences.
Yeah, we're all responsible for ourselves, right? And so what kind of risk are you willing to take, I guess, is that, because I have definitely like taken off layers, and that helmet comes off and it goes on the handlebars, and I'm taking off a layer too, like on a gravel road or something. And I'm taking a risk, whether I'm probably going at like 10, 15, depending, and I'm still pedaling. So that's, I could still crash and hurt myself, but what do you guys do for first aid kits?
I have gotten through the outdoor industry random ones over the years, and then I've always customized them. They usually have some stuff in them that's completely useless and are missing some stuff that I would consider pretty essential. I've also been lucky enough to be able to take one of the, I think it's called like backcountry experience or something, which is a mountain bike oriented first aid course. They have a pretty phenomenal recommended list. And it's pretty extensive, but that's kind of their point is, if you're out in some of these remote places, to deal with some major issues, you could need some major things. But I think honestly, Band-Aids are huge. Advil or ibuprofen or whatever your NSAID of choice kind of is huge, as well as Neosporin or some other sort of antibacterial if you do get any sort of gashes or cuts. And much more than that requires, I feel like, almost a greater level of medical knowledge for things beyond that to be useful. So I think it somewhat depends on what you're comfortable with dealing with as well.
Yeah, I'm super big on like an Imodium or some kind of like stomach action for like when you do get those tummy aches and you're like not for just hanging out in a hole in the ground. It happens, you guys. We're outside, like we all have like those moments. So that's always like something that I keep in my med kit 100%. That, and I really like to keep like random bandanas, just because you don't know if like you ever need a splint or something, and also it's just good to have to cover your mouth, even a buff too. But bandanas, you have a little bit more liberty to like tie in different areas, whereas a buff is more that like infinity scarf action.
Sure. So I just want to get to some of the other questions quick, you guys. Amanda wants to know what you say to yourself during the dark moments.
Just keep spinning.
Shut up, legs. You got this. Yeah, I guess it depends on the, I don't know. Yeah, I just like, I can do this. I can keep going, like dig deeper, grab a gear, or just like sit back and just chill out. It's not a race. Those are kind of things that I talk to myself about.
Yeah. I think for me during like the long days, well, one, because I've done some pretty long days before, it's really nice having the confidence that I've done that before, that I've been there before. So I think like the first step, and I imagine that Amanda is thinking about this going into that stage race that she's doing. I think the first step would just be to make sure you have some long days like under your belt before there's any sort of like, performative or performance element. And then, I think also for me during like the hardest times, I don't know if I'm really saying anything to myself, but I do consciously focus like all my energy like on my breathing. And if I can find a way to like make my breath feel like steady and even and in control, then I feel more relaxed. And then I'm not like panicked about how hard it's feeling or how hard I'm working.
Yeah, and
also when we
go ahead,
Shay.
Nope, you're good.
We talked about this a fair bit in the endurance one as well, of using those those treats or those luxury items as motivation. When I hit this mileage point, I get X, or when we get to camp, I can take these stupid bike shoes off. Um, they're not necessarily always positive, but they can still be a reward system to help you keep moving forward.
Oh yeah, for sure. I did a 24-hour adventure race in March, and like having it broken up and being like, all right, I've got like 3 more hours or 10 more miles until I can touch my bike. And I'm like, I can do this, because my feet were hurting so bad going from bike backpacking to being more of like a mountain biker cyclist. It was like, I know that I just have 3 more miles and 2 more miles to that next point. And it is taking off my freaking hiking shoes and putting on my clipless shoes. I was like, I can do this. And I'm so excited for it, because I can get off, and sit for a little bit. It's huge.
Yeah, I think another thing, there's a few different approaches to like touring or bike packing, or just riding your bike in general. And if you are taking the approach of wanting to like intentionally have some long, hard days to really push yourself, I think it's really important to know going in and to accept the fact that it's going to feel hard at some point. So when that point comes, you don't get mad about it or you don't get frustrated. You're just kind of like, okay, yes, like this is why I'm here. Like I knew that it was going to be hard. And if you feel great all day, like that's just like a bonus.
We have a cheesy line in this household, which is that it's not an endurance sport unless you've endured something. And if it all comes super easy, then you honestly don't necessarily feel as good at the end, because you didn't, it's overcoming those dark moments that kind of gets
Totally.
some of that ROI at camp
Oh,
at the end of the day, or back home, or at the pizza place. Pizza,
yeah.
root beer floats. Yeah.
I say a lot with my friends. It's like, give yourself some grace, like I think that's huge too, is we expect so much of ourselves, and it's what you're doing out there, whether it's like 20 miles or 280, that whatever, give yourself some grace. You're still on your bike and you're doing an awesome thing. And that's what it's all about. We're out there having fun and doing what we love. And that's what's important.
I thought it would be cool if we went back to the how to pack your bike slide for a second. And Shea, if
Okay.
you went through what was in yours where, and I did the same. I feel like, Hailey, if you didn't touch on anything, that might be a cool last gear point if anybody doesn't have any other questions.
Yeah. I ride a super tiny frame. I'm like small, extra small, and I prefer riding on my mountain bike because it's comfortable for me. I had an emergency spinal surgery, and so like being super aggressive on my gravel bike isn't necessarily fun for like 5 days bike packing. So that's why I prefer my mountain bike. And because of that, I run panniers on the back. I like to keep things off of my front fork, especially when I'm like bombing downhills. That's kind of why my mountain bike is the like turquoise Jameis up at the top left. So that tends to be what I run when I'm like longer, and then I'll run a saddlebag when I'm just like weekend and super minimal.
Sweet. So mine is that top right, little donkey there. That's Buttercup. And I had a dry bag. I don't know if you can't see where I'm scrolling over, but basically, underneath the handlebar is a dry bag, and that contained my sleeping bag, pad, and bivy. And I did what we affectionately call the hobo roll, which is where I stuffed everything in there together and then rolled it up. It took about 2 or 3 rolls each time to get it to fit properly in the dry bag. I probably should size up a dry bag more, but that was my whole sleep system. And then on top of that, you can see that little turquoise bag. That was, it's called a lunchbox from Oveja Negra. They're one of my hands down favorites for bikepacking bags. And I had hydration mix, snacks, sports nutrition, charging cords. That was kind of my like grab and go setup there. And then next to the stem is one of those stem bags that Hailey was talking about. I, again, have a very small frame at 5'2" of me, and wanted to be able to store as much water as possible without compromising too much other storage space for things that I did need. So that's actually a liter Nalgene size hydro flask with a sippy top, because anything that's a screw top is like too much for me to deal with while, still pedaling. And then on the fork legs is another Nalgene. So I had basically 2 Nalgenes worth at all times, more or less, so that if I was far between refill or filtration spots, I was okay. And then on the other fork bag leg, I had my stove and fuel canister so that I could make camp dinner. In my frame bag, I had repair kit stuff, backpacking food. So that was, I think, 2 dinners and a breakfast. And yeah, all kinds of tools and other good fun stuff. And then in my saddle bag there was all of my clothes, which included a puffy jacket, which turned out to be super clutch because it was like 20 degrees that night and for much of the following morning. So expect the unexpected, especially in the high country of Colorado. That's my dog.
Alrighty, guys. Well, I think I've probably already covered pretty much how I pack my bike. But just real quick to hit on it, mine's the bottom left, the light purple bike. In the frame bag, I have my electronics, my repair kit, my snacks. Probably had some gloves in there and a light jacket. In the front, I had a sleep system. So I had a 0 degree, I think it was a Sierra Designs bag. Oh yeah, so I always use a 0 degree bag, basically no matter when it is. I sleep cold, so I like to be warm. However, if you sleep a little bit warmer, I know that some folks, especially in the summertime, will just use puff pants and a puffy jacket, and then like a sleeping bag liner and or just a bivy. Just to answer Natalie's question while I'm going through this. Yeah, and then in the seat bag, I have warmer clothes. So I always like to bring a dry long sleeve merino wool shirt to sleep in. I just think it's really nice to put something dry and warm on at the end of the day. And long tights, and maybe I had a puffy in there, and then my sleeping pad. So that's my setup. This was for just an overnighter that I did last summer, and I knew that I'd be stopping at a town halfway through. So I just had enough food for one night and one morning, and then I knew that I'd be restocking the next day. No stove.
Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but like talking about layers and things, I always bring, probably depending on how long, like 2 pairs of socks, like 2 different pairs of shorts, and then 2 shirts. And that's usually for like a week trip. So we all smell. It's just inevitable. It's a thing. Get used to it. Merino wool is your best friend. It's great. So that's that. I come in, I like with clothing, and I keep a clean pair of like thicker socks, especially when I'm out in the mountains. And I keep my sleeping like shorts or pants or like long sleeve shirt or whatever in my sleeping bag, so it all stays together and I roll it up. So that tends to be, maybe I'm a little bit more dirt baggy when it comes to clothing in that regard, but knowing if you're like by a river or something, and then you can kind of wash and hang up and dry on your panniers or however on a next day ride or over the night. That tends to be what I do, similar to backpacking.
I demoed one of those fancy Big Agnes bike packing tents, and one of the cool features was that it had clips on the exterior for you to hang your stuff out to refresh.
That's awesome.
Yeah, some pretty snazzy gear out there if you're into that.
Oh yeah, it can be as like super glampy as you want it to be, or as super minimal as you want it to be too. And like bike packing can be so intimidating, especially because of that trip planning, and you're doing like the routes and you're loading the routes and the stressfulness of like, will I have enough battery power and things like that, or do I know where I am? And I also print out and laminate like a hard copy map when I'm bike packing, just in case like your gear does go haywire in the mountains. That's something that I do as well. I don't know if you guys touched on that. I'm sorry, dogs are playing in the background. It's been crazy.
Yeah. Well, guys, I feel like we could go on this about all night, but I want to thank everybody for giving it part of their evenings to us. And if something occurs to you that we didn't touch on, or you have a follow-up question, you can DM the Rodeo Adventure Posse Instagram, and we will try to keep an eye on those in the next 48 hours or so and get back to you. This video will be uploaded to our YouTube, right, Danielle? For reference later.
Shea, you want to show those resources too?
Oh yeah, sure.
And then I think there's a way for us to share the slides of the presentation as well. So don't worry about screenshotting this page. It'll be out there, as well as this whole video of us rambling on.
Okay, thanks for joining, everybody.
Thank you guys so much. It was awesome. We appreciate it.
Woo. Have a good night.